Okay, so this is just a quick screen capture to show you how you need to do a graph, and this is for a straight line graph. So here I've already filled in Excel 2 columns, one for time and one for distance. We're going to plot them and we're going to take the slope to get the velocity. So I've got the time and distance. I have labels up at the top so that I know when I come back in a couple months' time what I actually had in each column. Always when you take data, you're going to have uncertainty, and that uncertainty is going to depend on what instrument you were using it to measure. So let's say I was using a stopwatch that had an uncertainty of 1/10 of a second. I want to put 1/10 of a second in for each of these. So depending on your measurement, they may or may not all be the same, but let's say they're all the same. So I can either type 0.1 into each box, or I can go up and hover at the corner here, and you see my white plus sign cursor turns into a black plus sign. Then I just click and drag it down. It copies that value everywhere. Okay, let's do uncertainty in the distance. I'm going to just make it another number just so it's big enough difference that we can tell the difference when we graph it. Okay, so there's my data. Now I want to make a graph and I want to plot time on the x-axis and distance on the y-axis. So I'm going to click and drag to select those 2 columns. And by default, Excel automatically puts the leftmost column as X and the rightmost as Y. If that's not the situation for you, if you want this one to be X and that one to be Y, you're going to have to do some playing around to figure out how to set it up. All right, so insert a graph. So I'm going to hit insert. I want to make a scatter graph. So I go over to the section in the middle where it's what type of graph. Then I hover over this very last one, scatter, and I choose the one that has just dots. I don't want any dot-to-dot lines. Okay, so there's my graph. I'm going to move it over so it's not right on top of the data. Okay, so I need to put on error bars. I need to put on a good title. I need the X and Y axes to be labeled and have their units. And the first thing I should always do is just check and make sure. My X-axis is time. It should go from like 1 to 10. And looks like that's about right. It's going up to 12. And my y-axis should go from 2 to 20, so that looks about right. Okay, so if it had reversed them, I would have seen that the numbers were wrong. Okay, so let's see. Let's put on the titles. All right, so I can either go up to the top here and say add chart element and say axis titles, or I can hit the plus sign. So once I select on the graph, I can hit the plus sign. And there I can choose axis titles. See, I don't want data labels. I want error bars. Let me put that. And I want a trend line. Okay, so now I've put on everything. Now we'll just have to edit all these things to make them right. All right, so distance, that's not a good title, right? I'm doing something that's plotting time versus distance. Never, ever, ever for your title of the graph put in time versus distance. The people looking at the graph can tell what the axes are. It should be something that explains your experiment. So let's do, I don't know, I'm going to say finding the velocity. All right, so people know what we're actually doing. What are we trying to do? Okay. My axis titles, I can go and click in them and change them. So my x-axis is time. I need to put the units, which is seconds. My y-axis, click on that and edit it. That's the distance in meters. Okay, so titles right. X and Y axis have titles and units. All right, what else do I have to do? I need to change my error bars, and these error bars you can see are way too big. If you make a graph and you just tick on error bars when I'm grading it, I'm going to be able to tell because it's just going to make them all the same size like this. So what I need to do is I need to make it so that my X horizontal error bars have a length of 0.1 and my Y vertical ones have a length of 0.3. So I'm going to click on the error bars. Let me start with the horizontal ones. And you can see it comes up with error bar options. So what I want to do is I want to click on this symbol up here, which is the 3 lines to allow me to change for the options. I want to have both. That means it's going to have one going to the left and to the right. And I want to make the value a custom value. So I'm going to hit custom. And then I'm going to choose specify value. And then what I'm going to do is, you see this other little window has popped up. I'm going to click and drag which column I wanted to get it from. So I'm going to click all those time uncertainty values for positive, so that means going to the right, and for negative. So I delete what it has in here, and I select the same lot. And now when I do it, I should see those error bars should get a lot shorter. They should have a length of about 1/10 in size. So let's see where they are. So they're there. You can just barely see them. They're almost as small as the point. All right, let's do the same thing for Y. So I'm going to click on the error bar to select it. I'm going to go over here, click on those 3 vertical lines for options. And again, I'm going to do custom, specify value. And now I'm going to choose my Y value. So I'm going to click on those 0.3s. And again, delete everything it has in there. Click on the 0.3s and say OK. And let's see. So the error bars are there, but it's pretty small. Let me make this graph a little bit bigger and let's see if we can see them. So yeah, you can sort of see the horizontal ones, but you can't see the vertical ones. So if that's ever the situation, what you should do is, if I'm grading this, I'm going to look at it and say, oh, hey, they didn't put on vertical error bars. So you should always put on some text. So let me go here and let's see, I want to put on text box. I'm just going to type in here and say vertical error bars are smaller than the point size. Okay, so that lets me know when I'm grading it that you did put the error bars on, but they're just so small they're hidden by those blue dots. Okay, so I'm going to shrink this guy up again so I can see my chart. All right, so I've got that. I've got my line, but when I put my trend line on, I always also want to put the equation of the trend line and the R² value on. So I'm going to click on the trend line, and you can see on the right side here, my trend line options have come up. So again, I'm going to click on the 3 bars, and now here I can see the type of fit. So I could, if I wanted to, change it to an exponential fit or logarithmic or polynomial, so you can fit whatever you want. We want to do a linear fit. So let me go back to linear, and then I want to tell it to display the equation on the chart. So that's down here at the bottom. Tick on that tick box. You can see the equation came up, and display the R² value. R² tells you how good the fit is. If it's a perfect straight line, it's going to be exactly 1.0. This one you can see is 0.998, so that's pretty darn good. All right, I'm going to grab that equation. I'm just going to drag it away so it's not sitting right over there. Okay, so this tells me my slope is 2.049 and my intercept is minus 0.16. The goodness of fit, the R² is 0.998. Okay, so that's everything you need to put on the graph. Now, often when you're plotting, I'll ask you what's the slope, and I'll ask you what's the uncertainty in the slope. If you're graphing it by hand, you can put on a worst fit line and find the difference in the slope. If you're graphing it on Excel, Excel has a function that will actually calculate the uncertainty in the slope for you. And it's called the lines_t or linest function. So what you need to do that is grab an area of your spreadsheet that's blank. So I'm going to go over here in F and G, and you want to select 2 by 2 section. So you're going to select it, and then don't click in it because you want to leave it selected. You can go up in the formula bar, which is this long white bar up here. Click in there. Make sure those 4 squares are still selected, and you're going to type in equals LINEST. And then you'll see I'm going to open a bracket, just a normal round bracket, parentheses, and it says next thing it wants, it says down here is known Y values. So my Y values are the distance. So let me scroll back over here. It's column B. So I'm just going to click and drag column B. All right, then I'm going to put, it says it wants a comma, so I'm going to put comma. The next thing it wants is the known X value. So I'm going to go, X is column A, click and drag those. All right, then I'm going to put a comma, and then it says it wants us to put in either a 0 or a 1. If I put in a 0, that means that the intercept is automatically set to be 0. We never want that to be true. We want it to fit the 0. So I'm going to put in a 1 instead. So I want it to figure out what the intercept is. Then I'm going to put a comma. And then I'm also going to put a 1 in, and that next one tells it true. I want it to calculate the uncertainty in the slope for me. Then I'm going to close the bracket. And now this is the important part. Don't hit enter. You have to hit Control, Shift, and enter. So when I hit Control, Shift, enter, you're going to see 4 values are going to come up into that gray shaded area. So I'm going to hit Control, Shift, enter. And now I've got 4 values in here. Right? What are these values? Well, this one here, if you compare, you see that's my slope. All right, G2, the one I've got highlighted here, that's my intercept. And the next values down are the uncertainty in the intercept and the uncertainty in the slope. So this one, let me put it beside, is the slope. This is the uncertainty in the slope. And here I've got the intercept. And then this one is the uncertainty in the intercept. Okay, so if I were to ask you what's the velocity, remember velocity is the slope, you would say, let me write it on here, the velocity is 2.05 plus or minus the uncertainty plus or minus 0.03, and units should be meters per second, right? Because I've got meters on the y-axis, seconds on the x-axis. The intercept, if I were to ask you, it would be minus 0.16 plus or minus, and then this item here in G3 is the uncertainty in the intercept, plus or minus, what was that? Let me round it to 0.20. Okay, so it's the intercept is 0 within the uncertainty. All right, so that's a very quick run through. Remember, when you do the graph, I'm going to be grading you on 5 things. I'm going to be grading you on, is the data plotted correctly on the X and Y axes? Are your scales correct? Do you have the axes labeled with units? Do you have a title on the graph? Do you have the error bar shown? And have you fit a trend line? If I ask you to fit a trend line, have you fit it and included the equation on the graph? All right, and then often in the analysis, you're asked what's the slope and the uncertainty in the slope. And to do that, you need to use that linest or lines t function.